Josh.
The dog is losing points. The dog keeps talking. The dog's on the point. I'm assuming the dog is a metaphor for you guys. Weird. So we're looking at Wednesday, May 2nd, and so we're going to get more into Princess Bride and do more ready bits. Information up there, gospel test corrections, Kings Island is full. Do your meme, make it meme-ful.
Use mine.
From there, you can turn it in either digitally or you can turn it in via paper. Either one is fine. We talked about this introductory thing yesterday. Now we get to the actual reedy stuff. So yesterday we got into, sorry, hiccupy. We started talking about the guy who wrote the book, or not this book, but he redid the writing of the book. But we'll get far enough into it today, it'll start making a lot more sense. Yesterday we just sort of got to the introduction where it was just confusing. My goal today is to hopefully move past confusing and get into making slightly more sense. And we'll sort of see how it goes from there. So we got to Miss Roginski, I think.
Yeah, I think we're on page 5.
We are on page 5 at the top because he was talking about when he, and so this was William Golden, the guy who rewrites our S. Morgenstern book, hated school when he was a kid. And so he ends up going from a kid who hates school to an adult who becomes a famous writer. And so he's sort of telling us that this book, Princess Bride, is the book that took him from school hater to famous writer. And so he's sort of giving us that little fade, the doodaloo flashback scene going into there.
He was broken spiritually.
Something like breaking spiritually. And then we got to the part where he wrote his first book, The Temple of Gold, and it says, I was trying to figure out the little blurb in the front. When he's talking about that little front blurby thing, there's those things in the very front of the book up here where he does the little front blurby stuff from there. He was trying to find someone to do the little front blurby stuff to there to try and help him out.
There is no front blurb. No, you.
Just being helpful. All right.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. At the top, where it says page 5. Here we go. So it's about who this publicity lady. So it's back up, blah blah blah. She said 26. I think everybody knows somebody. Blah, blah, bottom of page 4. I'm going there. Who the publicity? They said this old teacher of mine. You send her a copy. I'll sign it and maybe write a little. I was really excited. This publicity guy interrupted with, we were thinking of someone more on the national scene. Very softly I said, Miss Roginski, just send her a copy, please. Okay? Yeah, he said. Yeah, by all means. You remember how I didn't ask who Churchill played for because of her tone? I must have hit that same tone too just then. Anyway, something must have happened because he wrote it down right away and said, ski or sky? With the I told him, already hiking through the years, trying to get the inscription fantastic for her. You know, clever and modest and brilliant and perfect like that. Her first name? That brought me back fast. I didn't know her first name. Miss was all I had ever called her. I didn't even know her address either. I didn't even know if she was alive or not. I hadn't been back to Chicago in 10 years. I was an only child, both my folks gone. Who needed Chicago? Send it to Highland Park Grammar School? I said. At first, what I thought I'd write was, for Miss Roginski, a rose from your late bloomer. But then I thought that was too conceited. So I decided, for Miss Roginski, a weed. To be more humble. Too humble, I decided next. And that was it for bright ideas that day. I couldn't think of anything. And then I thought, wait, what if she doesn't even remember me? Hundreds of students over the years. Why should she? So finally, in desperation, I just put, for Miss Roginski, from William Goldman. Billy, you called me. And you said I'd be a late bloomer. And this book is for you. And I hope you like it. I was in your class for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades. Thank you very much. William Goldman. The book came out, and I got bombed. The book came out and got bombed. Didn't do well. I stayed in and did the same thing, meaning getting drunk, adjusting. Not only did it not establish me as the freshest thing since Kit Marlowe, it also didn't get read by anybody. Okay, not true. It got read by any number of people, all of whom I knew, and I think it's safe to say, however, no strangers savored it. It was a grinding experience, and I reacted as indicated above. So when Miss Roginski's note when Miss Roginski's note came late, it got sent to Knopf, and they took their time relaying it. I was really ready for a lift. Dear Mr. Goldman, thank you for the book. I have not had time yet to read it, but I am sure it is a fine endeavor. I, of course, remember you. I remember all my students. Yours sincerely, Antonia Roginski. What a crusher. Didn't sound like she remembered me at all. I sat there holding the note, rocked. People don't remember me. Really, it's not any paranoid thing. I just have this habit of slipping through memories. It doesn't bother me all that much, except, I guess it's a lie. It does. For some reason, I test very high on forgettability. So, when Miss Roginski sent me that note, making her just like everyone else, I was glad she'd never gotten married. I'd never liked her anyway. She'd always been a rotten teacher, and it started to write her first name was Antonia. I didn't mean it, I said out loud right then. I was alone in my little one-room apartment on Manhattan's glamorous west side and talking to myself. I'm sorry, I went on. You gotta believe that, Miss Roginski. What had happened, of course, was that I'd finally seen the postscript. It was on the back of the thank you note, and what it said was, "Idiot, not even the immortal S. Morgenstern could feel more parental than I." S. Morgenstern, the Princess Bride. She remembered. Flashback. Quick pause, because I know it gets a bit confusing there with the whole jumping around. So, he wants to send the note to the teacher, but he fears the teacher doesn't remember him whatsoever, even though this was the teacher that sort of shaped him and made him who he was. Why did she make him who he is? That part's still coming up here in a moment. So then he's like, oh, I hate you anyway because you're a bad teacher, and realizes that she does remember him because her note seems so generic. Like, thank you for the book. Of course I remember you. I remember all students. He's like, liar. That's the phone ringing.
Liar.
Does one of you have a pass to leave?
Phones don't ring.
According to the letter.
Wait a minute.
Guns don't
Wait a
kill
minute.
people.
Oh my gosh. Time to stop.
That's not my mom.
With guns.
Okay.
Yummy.
Wait a minute. Okay.
All right. Thank you much.
Yeah, you didn't say clown for a balloon.
That's it. All right.
Oh, thank God it wasn't.
What happened?
It was not for you. It was for me.
Oh, I thought I recalled my name. I don't know. I'm suspicious that someone's
My daughter doesn't feel well.
Oh, I already knew that.
Celebration.
Children, right?
Wait,
I'm the
why should
horrible
we
parent that made her come back to school, and I said, "You'll be fine." I was wrong. So life goes on. Let's see. So it's there. The whole when she does the whole the idiot thing. Idiot. Not even the immortal S. Morgenstern can feel more parental than I do. That you might not know this. Some teachers tend to be sassy with students that they like. And so that's what she's doing. She's sassing him a little bit. But of course I remember who you are. You don't have to try and remind me. She's like, I'm not going to forget. And then she mentions S. Morgenstern, which is the guy who wrote The Princess Bride, which then makes the whole connection thing. Now we're going to do another flashback. Or a flashback instead of our flashback. And so we're going to go back again to find out when he first found out about S. Morgenstern and The Princess Bride. I know, it's so confusing. Flashback, 1941, autumn. I'm a little cranky because my radio won't get the football games. Northwestern is playing Notre Dame. It starts at 1, and by 1:30 I can't get the game. Music, news, soap operas, everything, but not the biggie. I call for my mother. She comes in, and I tell her my radio's busted. I can't find Northwestern Notre Dame. She says, you mean the football? Yeah, I say. It's Friday, she says. I thought they played on Saturday. Am I an idiot? I lie back, listening to the soaps, and after a little, I try finding it again. And my stupid radio will pick up every Chicago station except the one carrying the football game. I really holler now. And again, my mother tears in. I'm going to heave this radio right out the window. I say, I won't get it. I can't make it get it. Get what? She says. The football game. I say, how dumb are you? The game. Saturday. You watch your tongue, young man. I already told you it's Friday. She goes out again. Was there ever so ample a dunce? Humiliated, I flick around in my trusty Zenith trying to find the football game. It was so frustrating. I was lying there sweating and my stomach felt crazy and I was pounding the top of the radio to make it work right, and that was how they discovered I was delirious with pneumonia. Pneumonia is one of the sickness where you get a fever and it makes you get your brain sort of starts to melt and you start hallucinating and seeing things. And that was how they figured out that he had pneumonia with the whole fake brain fever because he kept trying to get the game. So finding out that's when he got into his sickness. Yeah.
Isn't pneumonia like when your lungs fill up with like fluid?
Sure.
Yeah.
Shrek 2.
Okay.
Sandy?
What's a soap opera?
It's a TV show. Pneumonia today is not what it once was, especially back when I had it. 10 days or so in the hospital and then home for the long recuperating period. I guess it was 3 more weeks in bed, a month maybe. No energy, no games even. I was this lump going through a strength gathering time, period. Which is how you have to think of me when I came upon the Princess Bride. It was my first night home, drained, still one sick cookie. My father came in. I thought to say goodnight. He sat on the end of my bed. Chapter 1, The Bride, he said. It was then, only I kind of looked up and saw he was holding a book. All right, that alone was surprising. My father was next to illiterate in English. He came from Florin, which is the setting of The Princess Bride, and there he'd been no fool. He said once he would have ended up a lawyer, and maybe so. The facts are, he was 16 and he got a shot at coming to America. He gambled on the land of opportunity and lost. There was never much here for him. He was not attractive to look upon, very short, and from an early age, bald, and he was ponderous at learning. He's great at complimenting people he loves. Once he got it back, it stayed, but the hours it took to pass into his cranium were not to be believed. His English always stayed ridiculously immigrantry, and that didn't help him either. He met my mother on the boat over, got married later, and when he thought they could afford it, had me. He worked forever as the number 2 chair in the least successful barber shop in Highland Park, Illinois. Toward the end, he used to doze all day in his chair. He died that way. He was dead an hour before the number 1 guy realized it. Until then, he just thought my father was having a good doze.
You said dead.
Yeah, I changed the words because it saves kids asking questions later. When it says he went that way, it means he died that way. That's why I changed it to try and help. I'm helpful that way. That's what I do. So he used to sleep in the chair all the time, and he eventually died that way. The guy just thought he was sleeping. Yeah, I do that because it usually ends up helping people. And you guys want the phrase like, "What's dozing mean?" I just go ahead and change it when I read it. Death, death, death. He died that way. He was dead an hour before the number 1 guy realized it. Until then, he just thought my father was having a good doze. Maybe he was. Maybe that's all any of this is. When they told me, I was terribly upset. But I thought at the same time it was an almost existence-proving way for him to go. Now here's where it gets confusing, because did his dad just die? Yes. Isn't he telling the story? Yeah. And so he jumped back in time, flashback, jumped forward to his father dying and how sad it was, and then jumped back again to him being sad. Once again, at some point you're going to have to just reach out, grab onto your dad, so he's going to blow your hair back. The problem with this is I read my books so often that it blows your hair back often enough that this is what happens. There are drawbacks to having your hair blown back enough. Anyway, I said, huh? What? I didn't hear. I was so weak, so terribly tired. Chapter 1, The Bride. He held up the book then. I'm reading it to you for relax. He practically shoved the book in my face. By S. Morgenstern, great Florinese writer, The Princess Bride. He too came to America. S. Morgenstern, dead now in New York. The English is his own. He spoke 8 tongues. Here, my father put down the book and held up all of his fingers. 8! Once again, not a smart man. Once in Florence City, I was in his cafe. He shook his head now. He was always doing that. My father, shaking his head when he said it wrong. Not his cafe. He was in it. And me too, at the same time. I saw him. S. Morgenstern. He had a head like this. That big. And he shaped his hands like a big balloon. Great man in Florence City. Not so much in America. Has it got any sports in it? Fencing, fighting, torture, poison, true love, hate, revenge, giants, hunters, bad men, good men, beautiful ladies, snakes, spiders, beasts of all natures and descriptions, pain, death, brave men, coward men, strongest men, chases, escapes, lies, truths, passion, miracles. Sounds okay, I said. And I kind of closed my eyes. I'll do my best to stay awake, but I'm awful sleepy, Daddy. Who can know when his world is going to change? Who can tell before it happens that every prior experience, all the years, were a preparation for nothing? Picture this now. An all but illiterate old man, struggling with an enemy tongue, an all but exhausted young boy, fighting against sleep, and nothing between them but the words of another alien, painfully translated from native sounds to foreign. Who could suspect that in the morning a different child would wake? I remember for myself only trying to beat back fatigue. Even a week later, I was not aware of what had begun that night. The doors that were slamming shut, while others slid into the clear. Perhaps I should have at least known something, but maybe not. Who can sense revelation in the wind? What happened was just this. I got hooked on the story. For the first time in my life, I became actively interested in a book. Me, the sports fanatic. Me, the game freak. Me, the only 10-year-old in Illinois with a hate on for the alphabet, wanted to know what happened next. What became of beautiful Buttercup and poor Westley and Nico, the greatest swordsman in the history of the world? How really strong was Fezzik, and were there limits to the cruelty of the Zini, the devil Sicilian? Each night my father read to me chapter by chapter, always fighting to sound the words properly, to nail down the sense. And I lay there, eyes kind of closed, my body slowly beginning the long flow back to strength. It took, as I said, probably a month. And in that time, he read The Princess Bride twice to me. Even when I was able to read myself, this book remained his. I would never have dreamed of opening it. I wanted his voice, his sounds. Later, years later even, sometimes I might say, how about the duel on the cliff of the Nego and the Man in Black? And my father would gruff and grumble and get the book and lick his thumb, turning pages till the mighty battle began. I loved that. Even today, that's how I summon back my father when the need arises, slumped and squinting and halting over words, giving me Morgenstern's masterpiece as best he could. The Princess Bride belonged to my father. Everything else was mine. There wasn't an adventure story anywhere that was safe from me. Come on, I would say to Miss Roginski when I was finally well again. Stevenson, you keep saying Stevenson. I finished Stevenson. Who now? And she'd say, well, try Scott. See how you like him. So I tried old Sir Walter, and I liked him well enough to butt through a half-dozen books in December. A lot of that was Christmas vacation. I didn't have to interrupt my reading for anything, but now and then a little food. Who else? Who else? Cooper, maybe, she'd say. And so off I went into the Deer Slayer and all the leather stocking stuff. And then on my own one day, I stumbled onto Dumas and D'Artagnan, and that got me through most of February, those guys. You have become, before my very eyes, a novelholic, Miss Roginski said. Do you realize you're spending more time now reading than you used to spend on games? Do you know that your arithmetic grades are actually getting worse? I never minded when she knocked me. We were alone in the schoolroom, and I was after her for somebody good to devour. She shook her head. You're certainly blooming, Billy, before my very eyes. I just don't know into what. I just stood there and waited for her to tell me to read somebody. You're impossible standing there waiting. She thought a second. All right, try Hugo, the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Hugo, Hunchback, thank you! And I would turn, ready to begin my sprint to the library. I heard her words sighed behind me as I moved. This can't last. It just can't last. But it did. And it has. I'm as devoted to adventure now as then. And that's never going to stop. The first book of mine I mentioned, The Temple of Gold, do you know where the title comes from? The movie Gunga Din. Really old movie, like the 1940s. It's like a war movie. Which I've seen 16 times. And I still think is the greatest adventure movie ever made. By the way, he saw it 16 times back before we had Netflix and movie rentals. He saw it 16 times in the theater. This was back where the only time you could see a movie was in the theater. He really liked that movie.
You might watch the movie anyway.
Yeah. All right, true story about Gunga Din. When I got discharged from the Army, I made a vow never to go back on an Army base. No big deal, just a simple lifelong vow. Okay, now I'm home the day after I get out, and I've got a buddy at Fort Sheridan nearby, and I called to check in, and he says, hey, guess what's showing at the movie theater here on base tonight? Gunga Din. Hey, let's go, I said. It's tricky. You're a civilian. Can't go on base. Upshot? I got back into my Army uniform the first night I was out, snuck onto the Army base to see the movie. Snuck back. Thief in the night. Heart pounding, the sweats, everything. I'm addicted to action, adventure, call it what you will, in any way, shape, etc. I never miss an Alan Ladd picture, an Errol Flynn picture. I still don't miss John Wayne pictures. My whole life really began with my father reading me the Morgenstern when I was 10. Here's a fact. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is no question the most popular thing I've ever been connected with. When I die, if the Times gives me an obituary, it's going to be because of Butch. Okay, now what's the scene everybody talks about? The single moment that stays fresh for you and me and the masses? Answer, the jump off the cliff. Well, when I wrote that, I remember thinking that those cliffs they were jumping off, those were the cliffs of insanity that everybody tries to climb in The Princess Bride. In my mind, when I wrote Butch, I was thinking back further into my mind, remembering my father reading the rope climb of the cliffs of insanity and the death that was lurking right behind. That book was the single best thing that happened to me. Sorry about that, Helen. Helen's my wife, the hotshot child psychiatrist, and long before I was even married, I knew I was going to share with my son. I also knew I was going to have a son, too. So when Jason was born, if he'd been a girl, he would have been Pamby. Can you believe that? A woman child psychiatrist who would give her kids such names? Anyway, when Jason was born, I made a mental note to buy him a copy of The Princess Bride for his 10th birthday. Quick pause. Those of you who have seen the movie, you'll be familiar with the part with the grandpa reading the story to the kid. That's an homage and a reference to the fact that William Goldman made his story famous because of his childhood. So they worked that into the movie because of the connection to him. I'm going to have you... the bell's ringing a minute early.